crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I am here to share how I'm going to make 8 mini slimline cards with a piece of 12 by 12 paper and no pattern paper scraps. This is a downloadable PDF over on my blog. There'll be a link in the video description, and you can download, and it tells you exactly how to cut out your 12 by 12 piece of paper, and then it shows you a suggested sketch. I like to add cardstock around all of my pattern paper pieces. If you don't, it's definitely going to give it a little bit of a different look. Recently, Craftsmith Co. reached out to me, and they are the ones who make the hot buy pattern papers for Michaels. They asked if they could send me some paper pads, and if I liked them, I could share them with you guys. I like to use pattern paper. I use it regularly, and I know a lot of people like to see ideas for these larger pieces of paper, so I thought, why not? And so today's video is not sponsored or anything, but just want to be upfront that I did receive these from the company, this paper pad. I am going to pick 2 pieces of pattern paper that I think will work well for cards. I will say these big 12 by 12s do seem a little bit more oriented towards scrapbookers. They are meant to be used very large sometimes, and they have a sort of summer road trip theme, this particular paper pad. But I think some of the pieces were good for card makers, and so especially if you're the kind of person who likes to do both, it can be good to see some ideas for which ones would be well suited for cards, and then you can use the others for your different purposes. I also think a lot of home decor stuff and kids crafts, you could use a lot of the other papers for. Today I just chose some ones that I thought would work well with the design that I came up with. People have been asking me about mini slimline cards because I like to do a lot of templates and show you guys ideas for how to get some really good use of your pattern paper. I hesitated on mini slimlines in part because you have to make a 6x6 card base. So I chose a 3x6 mini slimline. That's what I found to be most common online, but I did see there were some other different ideas about what a mini slimline might be. And it's kind of like the regular slimline. Like some people use a slightly different size, but mine is 3x6. That's what mine are going to be going forward. Because again, I believe that to be the most common size. But just a heads up there. I'm not going to talk about what I'm cutting or the measurements or things like that because, as I mentioned, it's on the blog. So you'll know exactly what to do. This car pattern paper could be a little bit tricky because the way that I suggest cutting it out and then the way that I suggest the sketch don't actually work. Because when I'm right now, I'm cutting these medium rectangles. They're 2 inches by 1.5 inches. And they are a challenge because they're going to be vertical and my sketch calls for them to be horizontal. So I'll show you later how I address that. You can make this with just one piece of pattern paper, but because I like to mix up my patterns and I'm using single-sided paper, I chose to make 16 cards. And so I'll make 2 slightly different designs and there'll be 8 of each one. But I won't show you how I assembled all 8 here on camera. If you were to make mini slimlines, I would suggest probably 12 by 12 cardstock because you could cut that into 6x6 squares and get 4 perfect card bases. However, I do not have any 12 by 12 cardstock on hand. So I decided to use what I have. I have some Craft & Brown 8.5 by 11 because all of my cardstock is 8.5 by 11. I also it seemed extremely hard to source big packs of thick 12 by 12 paper. I could get 65 pound, but that is not what I prefer for my card bases. I prefer 100, 110, 120 pound type paper. So that was another reason I went with my 8.5 by 11s. However, when you cut a 6x6 out of an 8.5 by 11, you're left with a lot of scrap. I tried to mitigate it a bit by taking, I cut 8 card bases out of dark brown and 8 out of craft so that I could use the leftover craft to make the mats for the dark browns and then use the scraps of the dark brown cardstock to make the mats for the craft card bases. So here I'm going to be matting all of the design on this, I believe, craft cardstock, but then I'll use a dark brown card base. So I hope that makes sense. It's not perfect. I still had a lot of scraps left over, but it was a lot of, like, for instance, craft colored scraps, which I love to use craft colored paper. So the next time I do a one sheet wonder or I need some mats or whatever, I'm going to be able to reach for that. I also, as many of you know, will create like fake foam tape where I just glue 2 pieces of my ultra thick cardstock together and I use that to pop up different elements of my card instead of putting foam tape behind them. And my sentiments are going to be stamped on craft cardstock, so I'm going to use all of those scraps to die cut out the banners that I stamp on. So a lot of the cardstock scraps were used, but not all of them. I'm fine with that. I know how to use cardstock scraps well. I'm terrible at using pattern paper scraps. So that's just a personal preference. I'm going to be using a sentiment from a Paper Smooches stamp set. Paper Smooches is no longer in business, so you can't get this stamp set, but it's just a simple sentiment. There are 2 simple sentiments that I'm using. I try to focus on just using what I have rather than always showing you the latest and greatest, because I know a lot of you, that's kind of where you are too. And so, yeah, because sometimes I'll get like a, where can you find this or that in the comments. Anyway, I am there. I'm showing you how I'm putting a little bit of cardstock behind my sentiment to give it a bit of dimension, but also because if I were to tape the sentiment banner to the back cars and all the way over those different rectangles, it would get really lumpy. And so to make things more even, I put those little bits of cardstock behind it. And that's another great use for all those little scraps. Now, for my second set of cards, I had the cars facing the wrong way, which is not wrong. It's just that it's different than the sketch. And I wanted to show you that, again, my sketches are just a suggestion. Like, this is the, one typical or easy or whatever way that you can use these shapes. However, the main key in this is to just, like, whatever shapes I cut out, incorporate them all onto the cards so that there are no scraps left over. Because as you can imagine, if you were to just cut this background and do something really awesome and pretty over it, would be great, but you'd have a lot of like strips of paper left. And so I'm showing you, here's the measurements for how to cut those strips of paper that are left into an even number so that you could put one on each card. And then you can choose however you want to use those rectangles. So I made my card vertical instead of horizontal in this case. I want to stamp 8 of this oval sentiment. So I die cut 8 of them, and I die cut 8. I also die cutted 8. Die cutted? Is that how you say it? Anyway, I die cut. I think it's without the ed. 8 of each. And I put it in my MISTI, but because I want to stamp a bunch of them, I made a little template for myself. And I have a video about about like quickly making sentiments that addresses this in more detail. But I basically put a piece of painter's tape such that the sticky part is coming through. And that allows me to stamp a whole bunch of these really quick because I can just keep putting the rectangle in, stamping down with my MISTI, and then I can place this on. So that is my 2 different card designs. I'll make 8 of each, and I've used 2 pieces of pattern paper with no scraps. And all of the information is over on my blog. I will leave you some links to the products that I used in the video description below. Thank you so much for joining me. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more videos about using pattern paper or card making, please subscribe to my channel. Thanks so much. Have an awesome day. Bye.